Hey, it's Mazzy. Welcome back. Becoming Led Zeppelin. I don't talk about Led Zeppelin much. A year ago, I did a video, and it was called My Obligatory Led Zeppelin Video, because I felt I needed to showcase my interest in Led Zeppelin as much as I was into them. I'm that generation, bought the first albums, all the albums as they came out. The first album I think I bought late January of '69, and then subsequent albums, pretty much in the first week or so they came out. But I want to kind of do a review on this film in my way, Becoming Led Zeppelin, because a few people asked me about it if I had seen it, and I finally saw it this past week on IMAX. And the short review is I friggin' loved it. I had a great 2+ hours in that theater. The music, the way it was presented, everything. Now, I decided not to read any other reviews, watch any other YouTube reviews, read any comments on the forums, the thread, because after I saw the movie, I realized that I think a lot of the hardcore super fans, with exceptions, weren't as thrilled with it as I was. Now, I know a lot about Zeppelin. I don't know all the details. I don't know every recording in terms of live things and in the whole history. I'm not deep in the weeds. In fact, as much as I love them and I bought all the records, I don't think they're even in my top 10 band. But I know the importance and I admire them and I enjoy their music when I'm in the mood for their music. So I'm going to talk about this. What's interesting with this documentary, I think people have to realize the title says it all. This is Becoming Led Zeppelin. This is the 4 members of Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, Robert Plant, and John Bonham, growing up, learning to play music, being influenced by a lot of kind of artists early in the day, and then getting into playing music as a profession. And I love the way they did that. So for this video, I'm going to go through and kind of review the movie as I go along when I think of things to talk about. This is all off the cuff. I pulled a bunch of records from my collection. Some they showed in the documentary, a few maybe that relate, that are important in the history of all 4 members in Led Zeppelin. I think they're very important, especially since 2 of the members were studio musicians leading up to this. And in the documentary, if you haven't seen it, there's no spoilers really here. You know the history of Zeppelin, at least some of you do. They only talk about 2 albums. They only lead into 1969. So it's Becoming the band in January '69 in America, March in the UK. This album comes out. I bought it late the first month, I believe it came out. And then obviously towards the end of the year, Led Zeppelin II came out. I'll get into these 2 records at the end of the video because I want to lead up to it. Now, what I liked about the video is there weren't all these extra talking heads. No Dave Grohl, no Bono, no Wayne Shorter, no the usual suspects you see in every friggin' rock and roll documentary. It's just the 4 primary members. Recent interviews, obviously, with John Paul Jones, Jimmy Page, and Robert Plant, but a tape that apparently the others hadn't heard in years of John Bonham. And I thought that was beautifully done. In reaction shots in some case, as they were watching and listening to some of older footage. I think some of the freaks, the hardcore of Zepp freaks, might feel that there's not a lot of rare footage that we haven't seen. We've seen that before. We've already heard that story. But this is, when you see it, have a documentary like this, it's got to be for everyone or potentially everyone. And I've had heavy arguments and discussions of this, like the Dylan movie, the biopic that is out now. That's only about a small segment from '61 to '65, and it tells a story through composites. This is a documentary, and it tells stories. They each kind of tell their story with some vintage photographs, vintage archival footage, some with and without sound. And I thought it was done beautifully. I love the sound in the IMAX theater. It was wonderful. Had a great time with my friend Coffee Julie, and we both loved it. Obviously, these British groups were so influenced in the 1960s and late 50s from American music, especially American rock and roll. And obviously, Little Richard came up in the documentary, obviously influenced everyone from the Beatles to the Stones to Led Zeppelin. Every band was either influenced by these American rock and rollers from the 1950s or blues artists and folk artists from that period and before. Really important. They did mention one artist, I think it was Jimmy Page, who mentioned Lonnie Donegan. Now, I got turned on Lonnie Donegan because of the Beatles. They really kind of started as a skiffle band in Liverpool and in the North. Lonnie Donegan was the king of skiffle music there. And in the documentary, there's a segment, Jimmy Page talking about Lonnie Donegan, how all of a sudden this changed his approach to music and his interest in music. You see the lead guitar player, the electric guitar player there at the time. This is the music of that. That's a big influence there. Also, we cannot talk about Led Zeppelin without talking about the elephant in the room, the blues artist, the folk artist that influenced them to create some of these songs and play some of these extended pieces of music, somewhat improvised, somewhat set up for the studio recordings, and not acknowledge the original blues and folk artists that influenced them, that they borrowed from. Obviously, over the years, and I'm not going to get into the details, there were a handful of many settlements of copyright infringement, lawsuits and things. And, it was a different world back then. And I'm going to give it to Jimmy Page and Zeppelin. Yes, they should have included publishing deals and credits back in the day. Some were rectified some years later. But I think a lot of it was not necessarily intentional. One, including Sonny Boy Williams. They mention him several times in the documentary. I think it's both John Paul Jones and especially Jimmy Page. Great folk blues artist, American folk blues artist. One also, and finally got his credits added years later on several of the songs Led Zeppelin did, is Willie Dixon. When you've heard Led Zeppelin records for years and all of a sudden you hear records like this, guitar playing by Bert Jansch, which I did a video on the other day, or I included in a video. In that case, they're traditional folk songs, guitar stylings. Obviously, I Am the Blues, Willie Dixon, is an important album if you're into Led Zeppelin here. A good part of the movie, or a segment in the film, is getting into the great studio session work of both Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones played bass, learned to play the bass, and then he kind of would always say yes in the movie. He talks about this, when asked, can you do this? Can you be an arranger? Can you play the organ? He would say yes and figure it out. He played organ in the church, and I love that because on that first Led Zeppelin album especially, I really noticed the organ playing a lot, which I just adore on that. But both him and Jimmy Page especially at a really young age, something like 17, was in studio doing major session work, one of which they talk about in this was playing on the theme song Goldfinger. This was orchestrated and written, arranged by John Barry, of course. The song was produced by George Martin, yes, that George Martin, and it was a great version of Shirley Bassey. I think the best of all the James Bond things. It just is a dynamic song, and both of them play on it. John Paul Jones plays bass on it, and as Jimmy Page plays guitar on that. And they really talked about being in that session, just watching. I think it was John Paul Jones talking about how Shirley Bassey was emoting just her expressions and doing it. Both of those worked at Abbey Road and the various studios at the time on a lot of movie sessions. And John Paul Jones would start scoring and arranging sessions. And other records that Jimmy Page mentioned that he played on, he didn't get in specific song-wise, but obviously there's the Kinks. Now, despite what some people say, he does not play on You Really Got Me. He doesn't play on that, but he plays on other songs. I think Bald-Headed Woman was one, Burt Burns song that he plays on, I believe, but played on some Kinks sessions there. Plays on one track on here, he plays on Heart of Stone of the Rolling Stones, which he mentions. Didn't mention the song, I don't believe. He also plays on a couple of Who tracks back then. And it does come out when he's talking about those bands. I played on the Who, I played on the Stones. I play in the Kinks, but he says, I didn't play on any Beatles records. I thought that was really kind of fun and interesting. You can't talk about Led Zeppelin without talking about Mickey Most. Mickey Most was one of the producers du jour of pop hits in London in the mid-1960s, 60s to the end of the decade, probably and beyond. I didn't really follow him much after that, but they mentioned Mickey Most. Mickey Most shared an office with Peter Grant, who was his partner, and they had production deals. They did production, and Peter Grant would manage some of the artists as well. And Herman's Hermits was brought up too. Jimmy Page played on some of these productions by Mickey Most, Herman's Hermits. And there's a lot of cross-pollination going on with Mickey Most and his artists that he worked with. Obviously, Herman's Hermits did a song called Museum, written by Donovan. This is the song they reference in the film in Becoming Led Zeppelin, and that's Sunshine Superman, that guitar riff, one of his first kind of lead solos on a pop album. And this was a major hit for Donovan. Early pop, psychedelia. John Paul Jones would arrange some of these things, and to this day, not everyone knows who played on what. There's different recollections of who actually played on what track. So that's something that, I'm gonna say one thing and some commenters are gonna say, no, that's not the case. Nobody really knows. Another album, Mickey Most production, that was a massive hit, and I bought the single back when it came out in 1967, was a theme to the film To Sir With Love, that great Sidney Poitier film by Lulu. Again, another record produced by Mickey Most, arranged on here, the orchestration arrangements were John Paul Jones, a massive, massive hit. Then there's Jeff Beck, of course, who had joined the Yardbirds, and I'm going a little in and out of order because this kind of tells the story the way I remember the movie. And obviously, this is also a production of Mickey Most. Mickey Most was trying to get these artists to have hit records and hit singles. Now, this didn't really have a hit single. Of course, Rod Stewart sings on a couple tracks, but you have them covering Shapes of Things, the Yardbirds song, the Morning Dew that every folk and rock, everybody from the psychedelic Grateful Dead to so many folk artists recorded that. Beck's Bolero, probably the most coolest original song on here. And You Shook Me, which obviously would become a song that Led Zeppelin would do later on, but produced by Mickey Most here. It's a song that's important in the Led Zeppelin story because it was really that crossover from the Yardbirds to the new Yardbirds, and that is The Train Kept A-Rollin'. And this version of it, this is not the original, but this is the one that really became more famous in America, and of course, all the Brits love this. Johnny Burnett Rock and Roll Trio, and that's The Train Kept A-Rollin'. This is a fantastic rockabilly rock and roll record, important record, and obviously this is early record that the Yardbirds and Jimmy Page, when he joined the Yardbirds, were very influenced by. Of course, they covered this. It was a hit for them. Train Kept A-Rolling is such a great song, and I'd be remiss if I didn't pull out this soundtrack to blow up. 1966 film by Antonioni. I love this film, one of my very favorite films, and there's an exquisite scene with the Yardbirds in a club, shot beautifully. In fact, in the Becoming Led Zeppelin, there's a clip from that. It's just really great Technicolor. And Herbie Hancock did this soundtrack, but there's one performance of the Yardbirds doing Train Kept A-Rollin' in 1966, and it's beautifully shot. And of course, it has the makeup of Jeff Beck with Jimmy Page, and it's just a beautiful rock and intense document of them at that time. Set up with some smashing instrument stuff. It was made for the storyline a little bit, but this is a great version, and there's a little clip of it in the documentary as well. You can't talk about Led Zeppelin without talking to the Yardbirds, and I mentioned them a couple times already, but maybe only second to John Mayall's Blues Breakers did the Yardbirds had like these great lead guitar players. They had Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton would leave and join John Mayall. Then Jeff Beck comes in the band, and they bring on, in 1966, they bring on Jimmy Page. This is the sole album, the final album for the Yardbirds with Jimmy Page. Jeff Beck had left the group at this point or kicked out of the group. and they became a quartet here. Now, this record didn't come out in the UK initially. It only came out in America on Epic Records. Mickey Most was trying to push them into a pop singles type band, and the band really wasn't having it. Eventually they split up, but this was released years later in the UK and other places. And this is actually a good record, especially the song, which is a pop kind of, could have been a hit, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Sailor. Really great, great album. But you hear a little bit of this DNA in here, the guitar playing of Jimmy Page getting into that kind of Eastern psychedelic raga type thing that he would bring into the later new Yardbirds, and of course into Led Zeppelin. I just love that guitar thing. That's the thing that really pulled me in initially with Led Zeppelin. Not the heaviness so much, but the dynamics of heaviness with acoustic guitar. In 2017, this issue came out. This is Yardbird 68. This was issued by Jimmy Page. He found the tapes in his archive, went back, remixed them, and remastered them, and put out this double album and a CD as well. I believe this is out of print for the time being, but this is amazing. It's 2 records. One is a live set of the Yardbirds in 1968 at the Anderson Theater, New York, and you really hear the intensity of it. Now, this was reissued, I think in the late 60s or early 70s initially, with phony crowd noises put on, and the band hated it. It didn't do well. It's a piece of garbage. It's terrible. They took out all that. It's just the tapes. He mixed it. This is one kick-ass band there. They do some of the hits from the early hits of the Yardbirds, as well as you hear this a little bit of Jimmy Page getting into his kind of a raga type recording, and it's really beautiful. You hear elements in this collection, in this set, of what would become Led Zeppelin the following year in 1968. The second disc are studio recordings they did in 1968 in New York, never released at the time. I think they came out on various segments here and there. You freaks will know where they were. I had never heard them before, but this is amazing. Really well recorded in a studio. You hear the DNA again of some of the songs that would turn up on later Led Zeppelin records, and it's fantastic, the entire band. This was put out by, again, Jimmy Page with help or approval of all the remaining living members. Chris Dreja on bass, Jim McCarty, and of course Jimmy Page. Keith Relt died many years earlier, but this is a beautiful book. Showcases that amazing year in the career. The band was very frustrated. The band eventually would pull apart. And Jimmy Page decided to put a band together, and that's how Led Zeppelin was created. Becoming Led Zeppelin doesn't take a deep dive, but it showcases a band from, again, the point of view of the artist. There's no narrator. It's shown through this documentary footage of how they actually put the band together. That's what it's more about. And that's what I kind of liked about it for this movie. Now, like the Beatles anthology, which is 10 hours, is there room for more? Yeah, of course there is. Would they do it? Who knows? Would they do volume 2, volume 3, volume 4? Would it have been a great streaming series? Sure, why not? But I like that was here. Maybe it'll develop into something else. Who knows? We don't know if they shot anything else. At least I don't know this. But at this point in 1968, Jimmy Page at the end of the year decides to put this band together. And initially he wants this singer, Terry Reid. Now, Terry Reid, also known as Super Lungs, was managed by Peter Grant and Mickey Most, signed to Mickey Most Production Company. Mickey Most wanted to make him a hit maker again and turn him into a singer-songwriter, performer, pop artist. He had this great set of pipes, and this album came out. Now, as it turned out, he said no, he didn't really want to do it. Also, he was signed to the solo project. This album is good. It's not a great record, but it's an important record. Obviously, it opens up with a cover of Sonny Bono's song, Bang Bang, My Baby Shot Me Down. There is a song on here called Without Expression. Might be the best song on the album. It's not a heavy song, but it's a beautiful original. Also, when I talked about the cross-pollination of things, side 2 opens up with a 10-minute version of Season of the Witch, that great Donovan song that's been done by so many artists, wonderful, and a cross fade in a song, Summertime Blues. But this is a good album. Mickey Most kind of failed. It didn't chart. It has a cult following. He would do an album in, I think it was 1973 or 74, called River, which is the best album he ever did. So he burned brightly, became a studio musician. But what he did do, when he decided not to join Led Zeppelin, ironically, the next year too, I believe, he turned down being lead singer for Deep Purple as well. Very popular guy, this guy. But he suggested to Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, and they become the new Yardbirds. And of course, John Paul Jones calls them up and wants to join the band. All this is documented. John Bonham was a friend and had played music with Robert Plant. He was brought in, and the rest is history. They were the new Yardbirds. I think their first tour as the new Yardbirds was in Denmark, and they realized they had something. They were doing long jam songs. They were doing the kind of songs you know as Led Zeppelin, and in that new Yardbirds live thing. It was really, really drawn out. The old Yardbirds were gone. The members of Led Zeppelin were there for a short time as the new Yardbirds. He knows what he wants. He wants to put an album out. He wants to get away from pop singles. He is a big fan of West Coast music, of American West Coast. He's been hearing about the psychedelic music, the psychedelic sounds. He keeps hearing that American radio in San Francisco and New York and a few other places were playing entire sides of records. He talks about this in the documentary. That is the time where they play a side, they take a break, they play the other side. He wanted to put an album out with no singles, that it's about the full artistic endeavor, which I think is amazing. And so he went into Olympic Studios with Glenn Johns as an engineer and came up with this. Now, he paid for it. There was no record company financing him. There was no nothing. So finally, him and Peter Grant in 1968 fly to New York. We have the tapes, no mixing, nothing different. You want it? You got it, this is it. And this album came out. Now, at that time, at the end of December, they fly to America and they start touring in America. They go to the West Coast. And he really calls out the Fillmore, going to play Bill Graham's Fillmore. And that's something that obviously brings it close to home to me, San Francisco, that time. One thing I want to mention in the documentary that I actually didn't know is Jimmy Page, when he was talking to Robert Plant, and they were rehearsing and working on material, and he really brought the songs together that he wanted in this record. And the second song on here, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, I've known that song, I think mainly before this, the year before this, that Quicksilver Messenger Service did a version of it, so I knew it. It was a folk song, and one of the more famous songs that Jimmy Page mentions is a version of Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You from this album. Joan Baez in concert from, I believe, 1962. She opens up and he talks about how her voice gets really high and the arrangement is totally different. But this was sort of a blueprint, him letting Robert Plant know, I want this, but in your way. And it's brilliant, them bringing this up. It's interesting how Joan Baez is all the rage now in all the movies now because of the Dylan film and this film. So hopefully people will revisit some of her work. A voice that I think is gorgeous, not for everybody. She's got this beautiful tone to her voice, very rich. Just her and the guitar alone on this album, the live album from 1962 on Vanguard Records. But that was part of the influence. And this whole album was a blueprint, and he knew exactly what he wanted to do. So they come to San Francisco, and I think they're booked 3 nights at the Fillmore. But what's interesting about that series of shows in San Francisco On that bill, Bill Graham usually always had 3 acts. Opening up was Taj Mahal. This is an album I bought around that time too. This is I believe the second Taj Mahal record. This is The Natural Blues. Beautiful, beautiful album. Folky blues, real rootsy music. And the headliner, Led Zeppelin was the middle act. The headliner was Country Joe and the Fish. Now this is our 3rd album together. I love Country Joe and the Fish. Obviously their early psychedelic stuff. I Feel Like I'm Fixing to Die. Later this year, they would become, especially Joe McDonald at Woodstock, they would do kind of the rock and soul song on this record. They got a little more funky. But I can't imagine this psychedelic jug band, folky DNA thing going on after Led Zeppelin. They were loud, they were raucous, they were intense. If you heard recordings around that time, I mean, Jesus Christ, they're amazing. And in fact, I am a fan of this series of box sets. They don't get a lot of love, and a lot of people don't like because the way that Jimmy Page mastered them and mixed them, and they're from digital sources, and I think they get ridiculed too much. I think they're pretty good. Now, I'm not one to compare all the pressings. That's not what this video is about. This is my favorite Led Zeppelin record, no question. No one comes close. What I love about this, and what I loved about it at the time it came out in 1969, is how heavy it is, but also how rich it is and how dynamic it is. It goes from these beautiful acoustic pieces, very folky, again, very influenced by the British folk singing of the 1960s, into some heaviosity, and gets really intense. I think up until this time, I was trying to think, what heavy records did I have before I had this Led Zeppelin record? And I think maybe Summertime Blues, or the Vincimus Eruptum by Blue Cheer, Helter Skelter by the Beatles. I can't think what else I had that was so heavy. Those of you who watch me know I'm not a metal fan. I'm not a big hard rock fan. The hardest rock I like, which is pretty hard, is punk music from the late 70s into the 80s. I love punk. I love the intensity of that, but I'm not a metal guy. And I did get into Deep Purple then, the first few Deep Purple records. But I think this is a brilliant album. And in a way, it kind of goes through all these different cycles, song cycles, better than any other Led Zeppelin album for my taste. Yes, the second album is heavier. This happens to be an RL, well played RL, by the way. It's a great album. I mean, I'm not gonna take away the greatness of their entire catalog, but to me, this is something special. There was nothing like it when it came out. You have tablas, not played by Bonham. They brought in a separate tabla player on this. I love that raga feel that Jimmy Page and the band was really into over the years, even going into songs later on, like Moroccan things and things like Kashmir on Physical Graffiti. But I just think this is a brilliant album. I love that he talks about this in the documentary, how he really wanted the album to songs to crossfade. Not every song crossfades, but that's what was happening in FM radio and playing a side. They play a whole side, and there was a feel to the side. You didn't pull a song out to be singles. Now, after this, there were singles coming out in America, but not in the UK. He wouldn't allow any of the singles put out in the UK for Led Zeppelin, and they became, I think they're to this day still in the top 5 selling bands in America, Led Zeppelin. Your Time Is Gonna Come, I think, was my first favorite song on the album at the time, along with Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. What I loved about that is this, to me, in my mind, I know this is not the case, is the only song where there's other members of Led Zeppelin singing, like harmonies. When they're doing that chorus, Your Time Is Gonna Come, I love how it's seemingly everyone's singing that chorus. It adds something to Zeppelin that I don't hear a lot. Usually it's Robert Plant only, maybe some vocals here and there, him overdubbing some things. But I love that I love that because it adds a little psychedelia. Now, this is not a psychedelic album, but it comes out of that psychedelic rockin' thing. Remember, 67, 66 psychedelia, 68 a little bit, 68 things are getting harder. And that's why he didn't want work with, Mickey Most, because he wanted this to be a complete piece of art in its own way. So 1969, Led Zeppelin's Crisscrossing America. They talk about that in the documentary. And while they're doing that, they had started recording at one point in England, but they went through a handful of studios all around America, and this was the result on this. Now, this is a heavier album. I'm not going to get into reviewing the album. That's not for me to review, but they talk about this. And again, I bring these two albums up because these are the ones that are mentioned, that are talked about in Becoming Led Zeppelin, where some people feel, the first album is a blueprint for this band. Obviously, Jimmy Page had such a vision. And to me, the sound of that record, I think it's the best sounding Led Zeppelin record. Other people disagree with me, but that's okay. This is a great sounding record too. It's a harder record, but I think it's not as dynamic, not in terms of audiophilia. I don't want to get into that here with Led Zeppelin, but in terms of the song cycles and the way the songs are arranged. If you want to hear more, you can go to my older video, my obligatory Led Zeppelin video from about a year ago. There'll be a window opens up and you can click through. I don't remember what I said. I probably told my experience. Here's my experience, just to include it here in closing. I saw Led Zeppelin 3 times. I didn't see him early at the Fillmore. I was kind of young and I didn't push it. I didn't go to the Fillmore West until June, I believe, of 69 to see the Who perform Tommy when Tommy came out. But in 1973, June 2nd, I saw Led Zeppelin at Kezar Stadium. It was the old outdoor football stadium. The 49ers were playing there at the time. That was their stadium, small kind of neighborhood stadium. And I saw Led Zeppelin there. And this was June 2nd, 1973. Opening up, Roy Harper opened up, just him sitting on a stool playing acoustic guitar. The Tubes, the band that really kind of rose in San Francisco. I think they came from Arizona originally, art rock band. I love that first album. And then Lee Michaels played with Frosty, this drummer there. I believe it was still Frosty at that point. That was a great show, outdoor stadium. After that, they wouldn't allow rock and roll shows there because of the volume. There was one show subsequent to that Bill Graham, a benefit for San Francisco, called the Snack Concert. Another story, another day. I then saw the final 2 shows of Led Zeppelin in America ever. Oakland Day on the Green, July 23rd, July 24th, 1977. Opening up was Rick Derringer and Judas Priest. And my girlfriend at the time worked for the radio station, so we got passes. I was going to a lot of days on Green over those years. And we were on a section, a risen section on the side of the stage. Not with the VIPs, but the radio, record, promo people. And I saw both shows that year. And it turned out to be somewhat tragic. I didn't know at the time. After or during that first show, there was an incident. Read biographies on Led Zeppelin with Bill Graham's people and Peter Grant's goons. And it turns out some of the members of the Led Zeppelin entourage, along with John Bonham, were arrested on Monday morning, brought to jail. Took several years for settlements on that. There was assault and battery type of situations. And unfortunately, they were taking a break after the San Francisco, Oakland shows. And during that time, Robert Plant's son died of a form of pneumonia. And so he flew back, and Led Zeppelin never played in America again. So I don't remember that being a great show. I was on the side, maybe because where I was situated in the environment in the middle of the daytime, even though I saw Led Zeppelin in the middle of the day at Kezar as well, more into the evening at that point. But that's my take on Becoming Led Zeppelin. I love the movie. So put your comments below if you liked it or not. I'm the right audience for this. I'm first generation Led Zeppelin fan. Maybe not hardcore like you, but obviously I understand the importance. And when I'm in the mood, usually I put that first album on. Mazzy loves you.